The morning sun cast long shadows across the White House lawn as President Joe Biden stood in the East Wing, examining his schedule for the day. His eyes lingered on the notation for a crucial meeting with foreign diplomats at the State Department, just a few miles away. The streets of Washington, D.C. were already humming with the usual morning gridlock, a symphony of honking horns and idling engines that seemed to mock the urgency of his appointment. "Sir," his chief of staff called from the doorway, tablet in hand, the Environmental Advisory Committee sent over their latest recommendations. They're suggesting government officials lead by example in reducing our carbon footprint. Biden's eyes twinkled with sudden inspiration as he recalled his younger days, memories of weaving through the streets of Wilmington on his trusty bicycle. "You know what," he announced, straightening his tie with determination, "I've got an idea that'll knock their socks off." The Secret Service agents exchanged worried glances as the president outlined his plan. One agent, Special Agent Martinez, stepped forward with practiced diplomacy. "Mr. President, while we appreciate your commitment to environmental initiatives, perhaps we could consider alternative." "Now listen here," Biden interrupted with his characteristic grin, "I've been riding bikes since before you were born. Besides, what better way to show we're serious about climate change than the president himself cycling to a meeting?" He paused, then added with a chuckle, "And maybe we'll finally get those bike lanes I've been pushing for." Within minutes, the White House staff was thrown into organized chaos. A sleek, specially modified bicycle was retrieved from the White House recreational facility, complete with discreet protective features and a small presidential seal. The Secret Service scrambled to modify their usual protective formation, while communications officers hastily prepared statements for the inevitable media frenzy. Just like riding a bike, Biden muttered to himself as he changed into a more appropriate outfit, a crisp navy suit paired with surprisingly sporty shoes. He rejected the offered helmet, arguing it would mess up his hair, but finally acquiesced after a stern look from Dr. Jill Biden, who had caught wind of his plans. "Joe," she said, adjusting his helmet strap with the practiced patience of someone who had spent decades managing her husband's more spontaneous decisions, "just promise me you'll be careful. And please, for heaven's sake, don't try any tricks to impress the press corps." The president's security detail had already cleared a route to the State Department, positioning agents at strategic points along the way. News helicopters circled overhead as word of the president's unconventional transportation choice spread through the Capitol like wildfire. Social media was already buzzing with hashtags ranging from #BidenBikes to #pedalingpresident. As Biden mounted the bicycle, surrounded by a mix of concerned staff members and barely concealing their amusement Secret Service agents, he felt a rush of youthful energy. The weight of the office temporarily lifted from his shoulders as he gripped the handlebars, muscle memory from countless rides kicking in. "You know," he called out to no one in particular, "this reminds me of the time back in Scranton when..." But before he could launch into one of his familiar anecdotes, his foot slipped on the pedal, sending the bicycle lurching forward unexpectedly. He recovered quickly, but not before several smartphones had captured the moment for posterity. The assembled staff held their collective breath as the president steadied himself and began pedaling with growing confidence. The protective bubble of Secret Service vehicles and agents on bicycles formed around him as he made his way toward the White House gates, where a crowd of reporters had already gathered. "Here goes nothing," Biden muttered, flashing his signature smile at the cameras. As the gates opened and he emerged onto Pennsylvania Avenue, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was leadership in action, he thought to himself, even as a small voice in the back of his mind wondered if perhaps he should have practiced first. Little did he know that this well-intentioned demonstration was about to turn into one of the most memorable and meme-worthy mornings in recent presidential history. As he pedaled past the White House perimeter, the first of many unexpected adventures was already setting itself in motion, beginning with a surprisingly spirited squirrel that had very different plans for the president's carefully plotted route. The squirrel, later dubbed Agent Chaos by the White House press corps, darted into the president's path with all the tactical precision of a seasoned troublemaker. It clutched an oversized acorn in its mouth, casting suspicious glances at the presidential entourage as if they were after its prized possession. Biden, who had just settled into a comfortable rhythm of pedaling, found himself facing his first crisis of the morning. "Come on, man," he called out to the squirrel, which responded by launching into an elaborate zigzag pattern that seemed deliberately designed to confuse the presidential bicycle convoy. Secret Service agents on their bikes swerved to avoid the small provocateur, their usual stoic demeanor cracking slightly as they attempted to maintain formation around a president now engaged in an impromptu dance with a rodent. "Mr. President," Agent Martinez's voice crackled through the earpiece, "perhaps we should consider an alternate route." But Biden, channeling the spirit of diplomatic negotiations, had other ideas. "Listen here," he said, slowing his pace to address the squirrel directly, "I've dealt with tougher characters in Congress. We can work this out." The assembled press corps watched in amazement as the President of the United States attempted to negotiate right-of-way with a squirrel. Camera phones captured every moment as Biden, still pedaling slowly, began sharing one of his famous personal anecdotes, this time about a childhood encounter with a particularly stubborn chipmunk in Scranton. The squirrel, apparently unimpressed by the president's storytelling prowess, executed a final provocative tail flick before darting toward a nearby tree. Biden, momentarily distracted by his own tail, didn't notice the small branch the squirrel had dropped in his path. The presidential bicycle hit the obstacle, sending its rider into an unexpected wobble. "Now hold on just a minute," Biden exclaimed, overcorrecting his steering. The bicycle veered sharply to the left, heading straight for a row of carefully maintained rose bushes, a favorite of the First Lady. In a move that would later be analyzed frame by frame on social media, the president managed to avoid the flowers but found himself on a collision course with a ceremonial lamppost. Secret Service agents moved with practiced efficiency, but they hadn't trained for this specific scenario. Agent Martinez, showing remarkable agility, positioned his own bicycle to help redirect the president's trajectory. The maneuver worked, mostly. Biden avoided the lamppost but clipped a small "Keep Off the Grass" sign, sending it spinning like a presidential frisbee across the lawn. "I meant to do that," Biden announced to no one in particular, straightening his helmet which had tilted rakishly to one side. "Part of my infrastructure inspection program." The sign incident, however, was just the beginning. As the presidential cycling convoy approached the gates leading to Pennsylvania Avenue, they encountered their next challenge. A massive tour bus had stopped right in front of their exit, its passengers excitedly photographing the White House. The bus driver, absorbed in explaining local landmarks to his customers, remained blissfully unaware that he was blocking the president's impromptu bike lane. Biden, now somewhat behind schedule but determined to continue his eco-friendly journey, sized up the situation. His helmet was slightly askew, his tie had developed a mind of its own, and somewhere behind him, White House groundskeepers were attempting to replant the "Keep Off the Grass" sign. But his expression remained unwavering, a mix of determination and that characteristic Biden grin that suggested he was either about to share another personal story or attempt something that would give his security detail heartburn. "You know what," he announced to his increasingly nervous entourage, "this reminds me of the time I had to navigate through a St. Patrick's Day parade in Delaware." He began pedaling toward the bus with renewed purpose, leaving his security detail no choice but to follow, even as several agents quietly updated their resumes in their heads. The squirrel, watching from its perch in a nearby tree, seemed chittering with laughter as the presidential cycling adventure prepared to enter its next phase. It had successfully created enough chaos to trend on Twitter, and now it could sit back and watch as President Biden faced his next challenge, merging into DC traffic on a bicycle while maintaining both his dignity and his schedule. Little did anyone know that the tour bus situation would soon become the least of their concerns, as up ahead, a street performer with an unusually talented juggling raccoon was about to add their own unique contribution to the morning's adventures. Having successfully navigated around the tour bus through a series of hand signals and what Biden called his Scranton Shuffle, the presidential cycling convoy finally merged onto Pennsylvania Avenue. The morning traffic had reached its peak, creating a symphony of honking horns and squealing brakes as drivers did double takes at the sight of the President of the United States on a bicycle. "Just like rush hour in Delaware," Biden commented cheerfully, weaving between cars with surprising agility. "Though the cars were a lot bigger back then, you know what I mean?" It was at this precise moment that they encountered Marcel St. Pierre and his performing raccoon, congressman, named, as the performer would later explain to an increasingly amused press corps, because he's really good at taking people's money. Marcel, a fixture of DC street performance, had just launched into his signature act, juggling flaming pins while his raccoon collected donations in a tiny Stars and Stripes top hat. The Secret Service agents' earpieces crackled with urgent chatter as they assessed this new security threat. After all, their training manuals had nothing to say about the protocol for presidential encounters with pyrotechnic juggling and politically minded raccoons.
"Now this is what I call entertainment," Biden exclaimed, slowing his bicycle to watch.
The raccoon, sensing an opportunity, abandoned its post and scampered toward the presidential bicycle, tiny top hat in paw. This unexpected movement startled a nearby food delivery cyclist, who swerved sharply, causing his bag of orders to tilt precariously.
What happened next would later be described by CNN as a cascade of improbable events that could only happen to Joe Biden.
The delivery cyclist's bag burst open, sending several paper-wrapped sandwiches flying through the air. Marcel, ever the showman, instinctively attempted to catch them with his juggling routine, incorporating the wrapped sandwiches into his flaming pin performance.
"Hot potato,"
Biden called out, demonstrating that presidential reflexes remained sharp as he dodged a falling turkey club. The raccoon, apparently viewing the whole situation as performance art, began catching the falling sandwiches and arranging them in a neat pile, still wearing its tiny top hat. Traffic had come to a complete standstill. Drivers emerged from their cars to film the spectacle on their phones.
The scene was surreal: the President of the United States on a bicycle, a juggler with flaming pins and airborne sandwiches, a raccoon in patriotic attire performing impromptu catering services, and Secret Service agents trying to maintain a security perimeter while dodging both flames and falling lunch orders.
"You know," Biden said, now completely absorbed in the street performance, "this reminds me of a talent show we had back in." He was cut short as one of the sandwiches, having completed its aerial journey, landed squarely on his helmet with a soft thump. The crowd held its collective breath. For a moment, everything froze, Marcel with his pins mid-juggle, the raccoon paused in its sandwich-collecting duties, the Secret Service agents tensed for action. Then Biden did what Biden does best: he laughed, removed the sandwich from his helmet, and handed it to the raccoon with a courteous "Thank you, Congressman." The crowd erupted in applause.
Marcel took a bow, nearly singeing his eyebrows on a flaming pin.
The raccoon doffed its tiny top hat in presidential tribute. Even the gridlocked drivers seemed to forget their frustration, caught up in the peculiar magic of the moment. But the day's adventures were far from over. As the applause died down and the Secret Service began to restore order, a new challenge emerged. Up ahead, a construction crew was redirecting traffic due to a water main break, and their detour led straight through Georgetown's infamously narrow side streets. Biden, now running significantly behind schedule but thoroughly enjoying his morning, adjusted his helmet, still slightly smeared with sandwich residue, and prepared to tackle the next phase of his journey. "You know what they say," he announced to his entourage, "when the road gets narrow, the narrow get riding," or something like that. He waved goodbye to Marcel and Congressman the raccoon, then pointed his bicycle toward Georgetown with renewed determination. Little did he know that the narrow streets of Georgetown held their own special brand of chaos, including a very opinionated neighborhood association meeting that had spilled onto the sidewalks, and a group of overly enthusiastic tourists on rental scooters who were about to make the president's bicycle journey even more interesting. The historic streets of Georgetown loomed ahead, their cobblestones gleaming like tiny challenges in the late morning sun. Biden, his tie now thoroughly askew and his helmet sporting both sandwich residue and what appeared to be a small autograph from Congressman the raccoon, pedaled onward with unwavering determination. The time on his watch suggested he was now precisely 23 minutes late for his diplomatic meeting, but as he would later tell the press, some detours are worth the story. The first sign of trouble came in the form of raised voices from the corner of N Street. The Georgetown Neighborhood Association had taken their monthly meeting outdoors due to the unseasonably pleasant weather, and they were currently engaged in a heated debate about the historical accuracy of a recently painted doorknob 3 blocks away. "Now that's what I call democracy in action," Biden commented, attempting to navigate around the gesticulating crowd. However, his presence immediately derailed the doorknob discussion. "Mr. President," called out Margaret Worthington III, the association's chairperson, clutching her Robert's Rules of Order manual like a shield. "Since you're here, perhaps you could settle a matter of crucial neighborhood importance?" Before his Secret Service detail could intervene, Biden found himself surrounded by passionate Georgetown residents, each armed with a 3-ring binder full of historical preservation guidelines and strongly held opinions about exterior paint colors. "Listen, folks," Biden began, balancing his bicycle while reaching for his signature Ray-Bans, "let me tell you about the time we had a similar situation back in Delaware. His diplomatic intervention was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of what could only be described as a swarm of tourists on rental scooters. Led by an enthusiastic guide wearing a neon yellow vest and a headset microphone, the group of 12 scooter-mounted sightseers came zooming around the corner like a flock of electric pigeons. And on your left, the guide was announcing, "You'll see a perfect example of Georgetown's historic."
Oh my goodness, it's the president!
The scooter tour's sudden stop created a domino effect.
The back rows of tourists, distracted by their phone cameras, nearly collided with those in front. The resulting chaos sent several scooters zigzagging across the cobblestones like confused lightning bugs. The neighborhood association members scattered, their precious binders clutched to their chests, while Agent Martinez quietly radioed for backup, adding, "and maybe some aspirin," to his request. Biden, drawing upon decades of political maneuvering, attempted to handle both situations at once. "Now, about that doorknob," he called out to Margaret while dodging a wayward scooter, "have you considered a bipartisan approach to the color scheme?" The scene devolved into something resembling a slow-motion ballet, tourists on scooters circling like electrons around a nucleus, neighborhood association members waving paint swatches and historical documents, Secret Service agents attempting to maintain a protective perimeter while avoiding the electronic vehicles, and at the center of it all, President Biden on his bicycle, offering folksy wisdom about both home maintenance and traffic safety. The situation reached its crescendo when one particularly enthusiastic tourist, attempting to take a selfie with the president in the background, lost control of her scooter and veered toward a cart of organic, locally sourced produce outside a boutique market. Biden, channeling reflexes that surprised even his security detail, managed to help redirect the scooter with a well-timed comment about proper turning techniques. However, the maneuver sent him on a collision course with a stack of Georgetown University student newspapers. The resulting spray of papers created a temporary snowstorm of headlines, most ironically featuring stories about urban transportation initiatives. As the papers settled, Biden emerged from the literary blizzard, his helmet now adorned with not only sandwich residue and a raccoon autograph but also several pages of op-eds about bicycle lanes. "You know what," he announced to the assembled crowd, brushing a feature article off his shoulder, "this reminds me of the time I had to navigate through a parade in Wilmington, though the parade had fewer scooters and more tubas." As the Secret Service began the delicate task of extracting the president from the scene, a new complication appeared on the horizon. A wedding photoshoot, complete with an enthusiastic wedding party and a photographer with very specific ideas about lighting and presidential photobombs, was setting up directly in their path. Biden checked his watch again, adjusted his paper-adorned helmet, and smiled his characteristic smile. "Well, folks," he said to his increasingly fatigued security detail, "I've never been one to turn down a wedding invitation." The bride and groom, who had been arguing about optimal photo angles, turned simultaneously at the sound of approaching bicycles and scattered newspapers. Their expressions suggested that their wedding photos were about to become significantly more memorable than originally planned. The wedding party stood frozen in tableau, their matching pastel outfits creating a stark contrast to the chaos of scattered newspapers, circling scooters, and paint swatch-wielding neighborhood association members behind them. The bride, still holding her bouquet at the exact angle suggested by the photographer, was the first to break the silence. Is that President Biden? On a bicycle? With a raccoon's autograph on his helmet, added the best man helpfully. Biden, now 45 minutes late for his diplomatic meeting but ever the public servant, couldn't resist the opportunity to spread some joy. "You know," he said, carefully dismounting his bicycle while brushing off the remaining newspaper pages, "I've officiated a few weddings in my time. Though usually with fewer scooters involved." The photographer, recognizing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, sprang into action. "Mr. President, would you consider? I mean, if it's not too much trouble." Before the Secret Service could intervene, Biden had positioned himself behind the happy couple, still astride his bicycle, his helmet at a rakish angle and his tie having long since abandoned any pretense of presidential dignity. The bride's father, a history professor at Georgetown, looked like he might faint from sheer delight. "Now, let me tell you about my own wedding day," Biden began, as the photographer frantically adjusted his settings to accommodate this unexpected presidential photobomb. The story was interrupted, however, by an urgent whisper from Agent Martinez about the increasingly late diplomatic meeting. "Just one more picture," Biden insisted, flashing his signature smile. You know, this reminds me of. At that precise moment, a familiar chittering sound drew everyone's attention. There, perched on a nearby fence post, was the squirrel from the White House grounds, Agent Chaos himself, still clutching his prized acorn. And next to him, incredibly, sat Congressman the raccoon, tiny top hat slightly crooked but dignity intact. "Well, would you look at that," Biden chuckled. "Looks like they formed their own bipartisan committee." The resulting photograph would later go viral, the President of the United States on his bicycle, helmet adorned with an eclectic mix of sandwich residue, newspaper headlines, and small animal autographs, the beaming bride and groom, the entire wedding party, and in the background, a squirrel and a raccoon in a top hat appearing to pose deliberately for the camera. The Georgetown Gazette would later describe it as the most Washington photo ever taken. But time and diplomacy wait for no man, not even a cycling president. With final congratulations to the happy couple and a farewell wave to his animal constituents, Biden resumed his journey. The remaining blocks to the State Department passed in a blur of cheerful waves, near misses with food delivery cyclists, and one final detour to avoid a particularly enthusiastic tour group recreating the Hamilton bird duel with selfie sticks. Finally, precisely 53 minutes late and looking decidedly less presidential than when he'd started, Biden arrived at his destination. His security detail, their own bikes bearing the scars of the morning's adventures, formed a protective circle as he dismounted for the last time. The assembled diplomats, who had been watching the morning's events unfold on social media, broke into spontaneous applause as Biden walked into the meeting room, helmet still proudly displaying its various decorations. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, straightening his tie in a feudal gesture, "let me tell you about the importance of alternative transportation and wildlife diplomacy." Later that evening, as Biden recounted the day's events to an amused Dr. Jill Biden, he noticed something had been added to his bicycle helmet, a small business card that read Congressman and Agent Chaos, Environmental Awareness Through Chaos. Available for parties, protests, and presidential bicycle adventures. "You know what," he said, carefully placing the helmet in a place of honor on his desk, "maybe I'll save the cycling for the weekends from now on. Though," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "I hear the climate summit next month is just a short bike ride away." The Secret Service agents outside his office collectively held their breath, but that's a story for another day. As for the wedding photos, they became an instant sensation. The happy couple even sent the president a thank you note, which included a small acorn and a tiny top hat, just in case he ever decided to take another bicycle ride through Georgetown.
Tell us in the comments what part of this story impressed you the most. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the world of incredible events.